So, Kelly, I think we'll start off asking about the book itself.
Okay.
So, what was the impetus for this book? What was where did you and your co-editor begin from for this?
So I guess I'll give the short and long version.
Okay.
Margot and I went to grad school together, but we were never in class together. And so our first book came out at the same time. So we wound up doing a lot of events together. And essentially, 2014, I think it was, 2014, she asked me to submit an essay for this. She had this idea. It hadn't been told yet, but she thought about putting a book together about home.
Okay.
And the initial was Wherever You Are. It was sort of, we were thinking of the kind of book you would sell at Urban Outfitters.
Okay, all right.
Yeah, it was something more like that. And then I wrote back with all these ideas and people that she could. That's terrible.
Well, I looked very stern for a second there. Yeah.
People that she could also ask and ideas about what home means. The honest answer is in that period, my own home life was falling apart. So home was something I was thinking about and consumed with all the time. So it was interesting to think about it in a literary way. The other part of context that's important to the industry, that when we went out with this book idea, we got a lot of feedback saying, do you really need a book only by women about home? This is, we're about to have a woman in the house, White House, right?
Yeah, as we all thought, yeah.
And then suddenly that's not. And this was pre-Me movement, pre-Trump, so it was a different era, and yet all of the stories written before all of that happened.
Sure.
It's all there, and that's.
Well, that's very interesting. Yeah. So, do you think that people thought it was going to be like a celebration of domesticity or something? That it was going to be sort of a regressive kind of take on home? Or was that what people were thinking?
And we were concerned that was what people were going to think, that we would be placing women and home together in one sphere, that we would be somehow understanding that's where we thought women belonged. And obviously that wasn't our goal. We wanted to really complicate the question and what it means for a woman in the place of home, not just a home she's making, but a home she's leaving, or the way that home can be the first place that you love and learn how to love, but also the first place where you're afraid. And so all of these different ways that the cross-section of women came to the idea of home really helped broaden that.
Okay. All right. We have a question from the crowd here.
So it's on women just because they wanted, I'm confused. Why was it just on women? I don't understand. So,
all right. So the question is, was why only women? Was there ever a time you considered, including male authors, or?
We did. When we were trying to sell the book, we thought about that along with our agent, and our agent is a man, and we had a lot of discussions about how men's voices would or would not work in this place. And we decided that we wanted to just go ahead and only focus on women, sort of to push against the idea of the expected woman and home trope, that it's a different place now, we have a different time, and it was time to re-explore that connection.
All right, excellent. So a couple of these essays were pre-existing, had been published somewhere else before, but most of them are original to this collection. I'd like to hear about that process. Was it about soliciting authors? Did any of the authors come to you, or was it reaching out to people you knew or you'd read other things by them, or what was that process?
Sure. So Margot and I was on the East Coast, Margot's on the West Coast, so our sort of networks were very different. So we started there with the people we knew, and made a dream list of people that we wished we could read. And a lot of them we didn't know. But so a lot of times we would ask kind of a really big writer if they would submit. And I don't know if you guys know about anthologies in the business place, but there's no money in them. So people who are writing for them usually are writing for the love of it, or just because they want to be part of a group project or a community. It's community building, essentially. It's not for the money. So each person got paid around $300 to $400 for the essay, and the editors, we didn't get paid at all. So, but that's okay. We got paid. Monetary money is not the only way to get paid.
Sure.
So there were some writers here where we would ask for them to submit. They would say, you know what, I can't do it, but I have this piece that I have a book coming out next year, which is crazy. I can't write anything new. But would you consider rerunning this piece, for example? So I think you guys said plane crash theory.
Plane Crash Theory, yes, yeah, that was
Yeah,
I know that one's been published before, yeah. That one, I will have a couple specific questions before. That was the one where I had to flip to the end the first time I read it. Like, is this kid okay? And and then I even did more research. Like, okay, all right, so he's in college now. He's running a literary magazine. Okay, all right. I was so relieved, just as a parent.
She does a great job at really putting you right in her shoes at that moment. But that was a good example of a piece she had come to read at Hofstra, where I teach, and she was reading from something else entirely, and I was reading a lot of her other work, and I had an essay in mind that I wanted to put in the book, and she actually suggested this one instead, and I think this works perfectly.
Yeah.
And then another example, which I think you said you also read, Freeing Thanksgiving for My Family.
Mm-hmm, yeah.
Is Jenny Penny Boylan, and her agent she shares an agent with us, and so the agent actually said, if you're looking for cross-section voices, Jenny Penny Boylan is transgender, and she would be a great sort of alternate voice in there. And yes, definitely, I started reading a bunch of different essays and just fell in love with this one, and so she gave me money.
Yes, excellent. All right, so how long was the process from some? Well, you weren't in on day one. You were in on like day two for this.
Yeah.
But how long was the process of gathering all the essays and compiling them and to publication?
I would say about 3 years.
3 years. Okay. Oh, wow.
We worked on the proposal for probably 6 months. And we sort of into it. We had an editor before we had an agent, and that's not usually the way it goes. But anthology is a different animal. So then we put a call out for submission, and we had open submissions. We posted in certain places, and another piece that I'm going to show you, the Privilege Fund.
Yeah.
By Maya Jewel Zeller, and then which one? I don't think you read the Sea on the boat.
I think we read Sea just for the our live after reading, right? Sea was one that was reread for today. So yeah, we haven't discussed it in class yet, but.
So those two were probably the best examples of Maya, who wrote The Privilege Button. She was a student who was recommended to us by her professor. So the professor got the call for the essays. She said, I don't have anything, but I bet, this piece is really perfect for it. So she suggested Maya submit, and we loved it. And then we had open submission, and Kylia sent in Sea Home. We really loved the idea of using a piece, not about an actual home, but
Yeah, it's so fascinating how each of these authors sort of interpret the idea of writing about home, and some it's very specific. I mean, home in four acts. I mean, I can tell that the author's coming from a point as a writer about design. Yeah, so I'm so intrigued that it was a largely open process. I mean, because these women all have very impressive credits that they're.
Yeah, I would say most of them we either invited specifically, or it was through someone else, through a recommendation. And then, we probably had maybe 50 in our draft final. And then we had to look and say, okay, well, what we didn't want, which a lot of anthologies that we see today are one note. So at one point we looked at a list. We were like, everybody was around our age, a mother.
Yeah, which I certainly have noticed that there's a lot of that, which appeals to me very much. But yeah.
But we wanted to make sure that we had really strong cross section. We wanted someone. I think this Danielle Geller, the annotating the first page of the first Navajo English dictionary. It was really important to us to have somebody from that background writing about home in a book that was housed in America, right?
I wanted to ask about that one. So, what is it like when that draft arrives for you, and it's formatted in such a distinct way? You're never going to see anything else, formatted quite like that. What's that experience like? Just getting an essay that's so distinct like that.
It was pretty wild. I would say that essay and undergraduate admissions essay draft.
Okay, we haven't read that one as a class.
That's also a lyric focused essay. But Danielle's piece, I actually heard it first. So I'm part of this foundation called the Rona Jaffe Awards, and each year they give, it's an amazing award. They give $50,000 to 5 female writers. You have to be nominated. You can't apply for this award, and so each woman gets $50,000, and it's pre-publication. So you have to not have a book published yet.
Okay.
Promise, right? An emerging author award, and to be nominated. So I went to that award ceremony probably in 2015. And I heard Danielle read, and she read from this piece, and so I had no idea what it actually looked like. I just heard words, that, yes, that. And so I asked afterwards, I said, could I look at that? And so she wound up, it was, we bought it. And then shortly after, New Yorker put it, and it was first published in the New Yorker magazine. And let me tell you, it was so tough to make sure everything looked the right way in publication and production. And still people don't. A lot of times people come to the page and they're not sure what it is.
Yeah, I certainly got a lot of a lot of confused questions from students who did read that one. Yeah. Excellent. So one thing we were curious about is when you were organizing once you had the essays you were definitely going to publish and the organization, because sometimes we notice there seem to be almost like sections of the book, or the themes of one essay will sort of bleed over into the next one. So how much was that a deliberate choice, and how much was that sort of happenstance?
Once we finalized the who was definitely going to be in the book, Margot and I mean, she's Seattle-based and I'm in New York, so we would be on phone calls like this and stacking them, and we specifically didn't want to separate them into sections. But there is an arc, we hope, to the story and the flow. What we found was when we had test readers, there were certain pieces that almost were too hard and made me need to take some space from the book. And so we wanted to make sure that in the same way that you think of a song, right? That you have the refrain that you turn to, and it might get a little more emotional, and then you sort of have the breathing. We wanted to alternate those things, and that was important to us. Then we did try to move imagistically from different pieces. This is like novels from chapter to chapter. So yes, we put a lot of thought to this in terms of the order. Like beginning with Kate Leva's Fear, that was intentional. And then at the last moment, to be honest, there were two pieces that could not be done. And one is sort of an interesting story. The anthology of the season last year, things my mother and I talked about, by Michelle Philby. She was the editor of that anthology. Her piece was initially in here, and at the last moment, our lawyers, not our lawyers, the field press lawyers, said, we can't run these. And that was a heartbreak for us. Essentially, she was talking about sexual abuse from her stepfather, and it was uncorroborated again with and so they said it would be a question of libel, it's litigious, and she said yes, he is. She said, I will take on any legal responsibility, but what's happening with the lawyer? So, but her own entire energy around that piece wound up. It's a beautiful story, and I'm so happy because we supported her piece. It's just the legal, the editors have so much control.
Sure. No. Yeah. Oh, I'm so glad that she was able to rise from that to put together her own anthology. That is fantastic. We're going through in this. Yes, it's a 1-1 class. We're going through a process of drafting and revising the essays that the students write here. How much editing like that did the pieces need? How much, first of all, I haven't. I meant to ask you, was this your first experience as an editor? This project?
I've edited for magazines for a long time, and I've edited in literary magazines. So I have experience editing essays, and then of course as a professor working with students drafting in the same format. But I've never edited a book, someone else's book. Well, that's not true. I've worked on other people's book projects as sort of a line editor or concept editor, but they always had another editor. So I'd never done this in terms of fitting the puzzle pieces in to make a larger something. So yeah, this was definitely my first time, and some of these you probably would not recognize from the first half to the last. And we went through 10 or 15 drafts, and others just needed, a quick round. So it really ran the gamut.
Was there any level of how many suggestions you would make depending on who the author was? This person's kind of a big deal. I don't want to make too many edits on her.
Yes, and also what's interesting is the people who needed the editing would not necessarily be the ones that you would assume. So that was surprising too. But yes, in fact, Margot and I would laugh because Pamela Houston was one of our favorite writers, and she sent in this piece that was part of an essay collection she was working on. So it was an already edited essay. I don't know. It's The Sound of Horse Teeth on Hay in the Snow. I don't think that was one that maybe you guys read.
I haven't gotten to that one yet, no.
Okay. And it's beautiful. And so Margot and I said, great, we read it, we're not touching it. And then it went to our editor, so at the publisher.
Sure.
And she sent it back with major changes. And she was, Margot and I are in our early 40s and been around a little bit. And Pamela Houston is big time writer. but she's not necessarily a contemporary favorite at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
And so our editor, who was younger, was probably in her late 20s. And so we wrote back and said, "You do know who Pamela Houston is?" And she had never heard of her.
Oh, wow.
So we said, we don't feel comfortable. This was a favor for her to give us the piece. We also didn't feel it needed yet. But for whatever reason, our editor, this one, to it. And I think if I had read the edit and it felt a stronger piece, I maybe would have considered it. But yeah, that is definitely a consideration in terms of how much push and pull you and who you engage and how you engage them. Certainly, there's
Absolutely. All right. So one thing that we found popping up over and over again was the theme of the authors talking about having an adventurous life, use the words like nomad or gypsy or explorer, and then they're either trying to sort of settle down into a domestic life, or they know that they're about to have to do that, or they see it might be happening down the line. I think your essay has has that going on in there too, sort of almost trying to do them both at the same time. I feel like, did you foresee that being sort of a big theme for this, or is it just sort of something that happened? And what do you feel about that theme and that issue?
Margot and I have talked about this a lot because it was not something we expected necessarily. And a lot of times when we get a writer to submit, we would say, feel free to text or email us with ideas, and we can say more like this, less. And I cannot tell you how many of these writers who were really included, first idea was, so I moved around a lot as a kid. I'm a nomad right now. And so many people, and we said, we've already got 5 of those. We can't have another one. And so we were very careful to choose which ones we let in that had that story, because we feel they're all, even if they might come from a similar place, the results are different in terms of the story they're telling. But Mark and I wonder, is that a prerequisite for a writer? Does that make you more likely to then become a writer in life?
I think that makes perfect sense. That you have the adventures, and then if you can't keep having the adventures, you can keep writing about them. Right? I always say that this is that's like the American dilemma. That the American story is the cowboy, the explorer, and so on. Huck Finn lining off the territories. But then the American dream is buy your house, settle down, be solid, and
right.
So which is it? What are we the explorers, or are we the settlers? And so I love seeing that tension so much in these essays.
Well, and I think I remember when my mother first read this book, and she said, I really like it, but so many of them are so dark. And it's true, but with an essay, you need that tension, that point of tension, and so much of tension in home is about leaving or trying to find or not having one. And so without that tension, the story you don't want to read is, I found a home and it was great.
Yeah.
That's no there. There's no investment. There's, no stakes. And so a lot of the stories are surprisingly dark, but after talking about it, of course we don't want that American the house and everything was fun, because A, that's not reality.
Yeah.
There's no happy endings, and then B, it's so much more complicated than that.
Yeah. And we were so fascinated to find, we found sort of almost like a sequel to one of these with a piece that Tara Conklin had in Vogue earlier this year,
Yes.
Because I remember reading the essay, and she sort of like vaguely mentions that her marriage was breaking up, and I thought like, oh, I wonder, did it? And so I Googled that, and I found this essay about the end of her marriage and falling in love with a guy who lives on a boat. It's like, oh, this is so great. So she still gets to be the explorer that she was writing about now. Well, she's found compromise. I always want the happy endings. Yeah, I'm that guy, but so that was so fascinating because of course, yeah, these stories are all ongoing. These are all yeah, there aren't really endings in life until we get to the big one.
Yeah.
So do you have a favorite essay, or the particular essays that touched you or surprised you when what do you have like the really strong reactions to?
I would say that's like asking who my favorite child is.
Sure, yeah,
so I can't say that. But what I can tell you is the story. When I came to this piece or to this project, I had a lot of ideas of whose pieces I wanted in here, and the whole time Margot and I were planning to write our own pieces. And every time I would sit down to do that, I just couldn't. And the more I thought about home, the more paralyzed I became in writing about it. And so for those 3 years that I was talking about, the two of them, I kept having anxiety that I would not be able to write my own. And so then on one hand, having all these amazing essays come into my inbox and, oh, here's another one, felt I can never do that. And then some days it would feel very invigorating and community building and, oh, I want to do that too. And I remember the first essay with that sort of turn, and it was Alyssa Washuta's essay on undergraduate admissions. And I remember I'd just come home from work. My two boys were playing and getting ready for dinner, and I was cooking, and I put the pasta water on, and this piece came across in my inbox. I started in the kitchen, and everything stopped. And I remember the water boiling over, like I was completely engaged, and I just kept thinking, this woman is out there on the other side of this inbox, sat down, wrote this piece, and rewrote it, of course, because it's lyric, it's involved, it's organized. And then she hit send, and that felt so. I think a lot of times we come to books thinking that the drafts just emerge in this form, and what we see in magazines and are draft 25, 50 sometimes, and I think we forget. And I remember that was the first essay that I read. I thought, I want to sit down and do that too, and it gave me kind of the ability to crack through my own writer's block and jump in. So that was a very meaningful essay. I don't think that's my favorite, but that was a very meaningful.
Excellent. Well, that brings up another question that one student asked about was about how about your undergraduate experience. Obviously that's what they're experiencing right now, and since you and I went to the same place, I think we might have some similar reactions to this. But they want to know what you studied and how sort of your whole undergrad experience influenced you and led you to something like this. So So what was your experience like?
Okay. I joke with my students a lot about this because I didn't take a single English class in undergrad.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, that's true. I took one for the sort of creative participation that you had to take. It was a
right. Yes. Yeah. They let us get out of a lot of Vassar's version of 101 was much more flexible than a lot of schools. Similarly, the science requirement, the quantitative analysis. I remember I took a course called Time, which was very very physics for poets kind of approach to it. Yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And I always loved English. I mean, I won in high school. I won the creative writing award at graduation. But I come from a very blue-collar background. I was the first person in my family to go to college. And so I looked at English as and books as something I loved, but not something that I could do as a job. And so I remember going, I worked on every literary magazine. I think I worked on 3 different literary magazines at Vassar. But I was an international, I came in pre-med, but then I realized there's science involved in that. And I did not want to get up at 8:30 in the morning for lab. So that quickly went out the window. And then I decided to go more pre-law. And so I was an international relations major, which combined history, political science, still stories. And I kept focusing on places where there were splits. So East and West Germany, North and South Vietnam, Israel, and like this idea of Israel, Palestine, whose story is what in what place, and those differing stories. What happened, especially in Germany, which is what I wound up writing my thesis about, when the wall came down and those 2 countries became one again. So much of their identity had been built based on institutional memory that was not necessarily fact, but they had to remember each other in a certain way to form their own identity. And so everything I focused on was about memory. And then later, after I worked at a law firm and realized it was not for me, and didn't wind up going to law school. I still feel like I would have loved law school. I just would not have loved being a lawyer. And then I went into magazines, or I went into the .com stuff, and then magazine editorial stuff. And people kept saying, "You're good at this as an editor." And I thought, I've been doing this the whole time. And then I remember sitting at a magazine, and 2 other guys who were working there had finished their fiction essays. And I had just found Joan Didion and Virginia Woolf and was falling in love with the essay form. And I remember sitting back in my cubicle saying, I wish they had an MFA for nonfiction. And they both laughed at me, and they said, of course they do. I didn't know any of it. It wasn't my world. And so I did more research in that and wound up going to grad school about 5 years after my undergrad, and went to grad school for nonfiction at Columbia and started teaching there. I never knew I wanted to teach either until I started doing that. And when you look backward, it all sort of makes sense. Narrative, story, even thinking about history and political science, that's the same thing, just in a different way. But I had to do a lot of catch up in my grad school because most of people had been English majors. And then now being an English professor myself, I had to really self-educate, which I feel like I've done a lot of my life, so I was with that. But I think it's a good example of the beauty of liberal arts education and making sure that you follow not just what you think you should be doing, but what you really love. I think I would have been, my grades certainly would have been better if I was an English major, because I would have loved what I was doing in a way that didn't love what I was interested in. But I wish I had the opportunity to be an English major.
Excellent. I want to ask a couple questions about leaving season. So you said that it took you a while to sort of finally be able to connect to this because of a variety of factors. It sounds like.
Yeah.
So once, just a practical question: where in Pennsylvania were you? We're just curious as
northeast as you can get. So New York kind of does this dog leg into Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And it's the far northeast corner. So the closest town is Honesdale. We were northeast, even Scranton. That's usually where people live most. And we were just on the other side of, say, Narrowsburg or Hancock on the New York side.
Okay.
A lot of people go to camp there. That's the biggest.
Right, you mentioned there's a lot of camps around there. Yeah, is this Lackawanna County? Is that
Even northeast of that,
oh,
it's
okay?
Wayne County. Yeah.
Okay, I I've lived in Pennsylvania for 7 years now, but moved here after I already had kids, so I've never gotten to explore it. You know, it's been about my neighborhood for 7 years. Um, so. So once you finally wrote down, you were writing about a difficult and sort of and probably painful time. Was it a lot of stopping and starting, or was it like I got to plow through, I got to tell this? What was the experience like?
It took me a very long time. And I think the most important thing was that I didn't force it. I think it came when it needed to. And mostly I needed critical distance. I talk about that with my students a lot. I'm teaching a class in life writing right now, and something that feels you want something that you're invested in, that you feel on page, but you need that distance to be able to step outside and view yourself critically. And I think I just tried to write that story. I didn't have it. I was still too proud. And it was really only after living outside of Pennsylvania for about a year that I was able to write the story. And it was, it went through many drafts, and I remember I still felt like I hadn't cracked it. And I sent it to my best readers. Actually, she has a piece in here named Miranda.
Oh, sure. Yeah, that one. I first time I read it, I was like, "This is insane. Why would you live like this? Why would anyone?" And then and then I'm like, oh, "Okay, I get it. Not for me, but I understand why it's for you." And then just some of it's just so the imagery and the depictions were so beautiful.
There in the sea, and I love that piece, and she's a really good editor as well. And I sent her my piece, and she asked me a few questions. And then in an email, I wrote this whole response about, well, what I really mean is this. And then she wrote back, and she said, you just wrote the missing part of your essay. Email. And I thought, oh my gosh, you're right. I think sometimes you need to move away from the page to come back into it. And a lot of times I have my students, for example, write a poem, or they hate me because I make them do these 3-word sentence outlines, where I say, all right, rewrite your story, 3-word sentences, because you're just in scene and action. This happened, and this happened, and this happened, and you forget of the emotion. And so it was really distant, get close enough to, and also nostalgia. I needed to leave to really just understand what I missed. And a lot of that was the landscape that you just don't have in suburban Long Island. And the sensory stuff, like the smells and the way that the sound.
All right. And a home now is Brooklyn, or is further out on Long Island?
Further out on Long Island. I'm in Port Washington.
Oh, okay. I think you can tell me that. Okay.
Yeah. I joke, though, that because my email address is Kelly in Brooklyn.
I think that's what threw me off. Yeah.
I call it aspirational. One day I will move back to Brooklyn. But in many ways, that has felt the most home for me. And Port Washington is on the water, but my first book was about Long Island. I never anticipated moving back to Long Island, and here I am.
Oh, yeah, I wanted to ask, we're short on time, but could you tell us a little about what your book was, what Welcome to Shirley was?
Oh, sure. That was a story about my hometown, and essentially...
This is a full-length book. This is a memoir.
Yeah. Essentially, it was this little blue-collar hamlet, kind of a working-class place next to the Hamptons, and then the other... so we already had sort of insecurities when you're the kind of the pool cleaners and the lawn guys for the people next door, and then we had this Brookhaven National Laboratory, which was a big federal sort of secret lab. What most people didn't know is there were 3 nuclear reactors there. All 3 leaked from the 50s to the 80s. And the way Long Island is essentially a sandbar, and so there's aquifer that the souls for a million people drinking the water. So there was a lot of illness, and my book was sort of taking a look at why actually going to Vassar was the time where I realized other people aren't going home for funerals and have lost as many people to this kind of illness. So I went home and interrogated sort of faith, and but also why do we feel like why are we accepting that faith? And so it was really about working class taking and poverty.
Okay. There's so much more I could ask you about that. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I have not read that or seen the documentary that it was turned into. But that is. Getting back to Leaving Season, 2 questions. One, how did you choose that as the title? And 2, I feel like the central moment in it, I feel like, is the scene in Ned's house where you really see the preparing the deer carcasses. Was that always the sort of the central moment, and you sort of worked backwards from there in crafting the essay, or did you arrive at that in a different way?
It's a good question. For a long time, the piece was titled "A Hunting We Will Go."
Oh, okay.
I only changed the title pretty much at the very last moment before I hit send, and I do feel like that's a better choice. A
little cutesy "Hunting We'll Go." Yeah.
Yes, and I realized also I wasn't hunting for anything, right? It wasn't an active. I wasn't the hunter, and I think it took me a long time to get to that caping image of that feel of like shouldering into another animal's skin, and I think that was probably draft 42. And once that happened, then I understood why I was writing, but it took me a long time to get to that moment, and then I could go back to the beginning and write to that spot again. I knew that scene affected me deeply, but I needed distance to understand why. And my process is to write it out while I'm figuring it out. And I just finished another essay where I've had this image in my head for 11 years, and I've known I need to write it. And I've tried to stuff it into lots of different essays, and it never works. Finally, just fit into an essay, and it's been sitting there the whole time. And it was the answer and the key to understanding this other essay that I was writing. But I don't know, there's an alchemy to that I do outline before I write, and then I never follow the outline.
Sure.
So it's whatever your process is.
Excellent. All right. Well, I do have to let my students go, so thank you so much. One final question, because I think it's interesting. What's the next anthology about?
Desire.
Desire. I thought it was such an interesting theme. Are you working with Margot again on that, or is?
Yes, we're working together, and hopefully the same thing. This thing that we think we know about, that we will turn on its head.
Fantastic. That's all right. Thank you so much, Kelly. Thank you, students. Excellent. I may be in touch with more questions because now I've got a lot more percolating. Well, thank you so much.
Thanks.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Bye-bye.